Okay, I'm in Colorado, so I'm going to be breaking up the scenery a little bit and not making some instructional or recommendation videos on how to navigate the uh, the current environment that we find ourselves in with regards to how your school is going to start services. The question that I've seen in more than a couple places that I want to address right now has to do with how do you know whether or not your child's receiving a free and appropriate public education, when it comes to these multiple options like virtual only or a hybrid limited attendance offering of a couple days a week. Okay, and how you do that is that you go to your child's prior IEPs. Okay, so you go to your child's prior IEPs. You could look at your current one, but some of you are going to have that sort of diluted because they may have given your child a distant learning plan, which is going to be a reduced or cut down amount of services. Okay, and so in that cut down amount of services, that would not be a good litmus test or a judge on whether or not your child's been provided what they need in order to progress, in their goals. Okay, so that only depends on if that's how they did it. But if they haven't, then you go to your child's prior IEPs, last year's IEP, the one before that, and you take an accounting, an assessment of how your child's IEP was developed. Number one, how much time did they spend in a general education setting, and how much access did they have to the general curriculum? That's going to be the number one, because your child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education. And that is why a general education teacher is a mandatory critical member of your child's IEP team. I don't care how severe or how impacted your child is with regards to special education need. That general education teacher has a seat at the table for a reason, and that is to provide that expertise, that knowledge on how your child can progress toward general education instruction and toward the general education curriculum. Okay, so that's the number one thing that you look at. And how much access does your child have to that general education setting, general education instruction? So if they've moved all the general education instruction to virtual only, and your child just does not learn through that virtual model and cannot participate because they're, let's say, a direct learner, they need a differentiated instruction, they were supported in the general education class, well, those things can't happen in virtual learning. So that's going to be your number one analysis. It's going to be your number one problem. Number two is how much special education were they receiving per their IEP. So you would need to look in your child's IEP, sort of calculate how much reading instruction, how much math instruction was it pushed in services, meaning that the resource teacher was supporting your child in their reading and math goal in the general education environment. As opposed to being pulled out of the general education setting and receiving small group or direct instruction with a resource teacher outside of the general education setting. And if that's the case, then see, they cannot provide those things in a distant or a virtual format, and that is how your child learns. And so they can sit there and say, well, we can attempt it, James. Well, guys, we already tried all that in the spring, and if it didn't work in the spring, it's not going to work magically in the fall. So, those of you that are like, well, I want to give them another, well, that's up to you. You want to give them another chance, fine. But you're talking about most of these schools are going to be doing this for the first 9 weeks, which means that you've lost half of a year. That's 6 months of your child's developmental history just gone, okay? And there's only so much time in a day to sit there and shove in corrective action, remedial services, compensatory. There's only so much time to sit there and try to recover and try to make up for additional or lost time. All right, I am telling you that as an attorney that practices in this area, that some of the most difficult decisions that we have to make and negotiate with the school system is where are we going to put all of this compensatory? Where is that going to show up? Because we use the summer, but what if the child naturally qualifies for extended school year services? What do we do then? So we have to sit there and tuck additional services, in between extended school year. Now, if your child doesn't qualify for extended school year, then great, we have the summer. But there's also so much time after a school day. You say, well, can't you do it during the school day? No, not all the time, guys. Why is that? Because every time that you're inserting additional services into your child's IEP that are not supposed to be there, then you're screwing with your child's least restrictive environment, because you're establishing additional services where none were required or determined to be needed by the IEP team. And that's what you don't want to screw with. You don't want to screw with your child's least restrictive environment. Okay? And that's a reality. So when it comes to stuff like that, just keep that in mind. That you don't want to mess with your child's least restrictive environment in trying to push in additional services. So if your school system comes back later and says, look, we want to provide you remedial services, and we're going to provide you some more reading service during the school day. Well, that's taking your child out of their natural environment. That natural environment or the presumed environment should be the general education setting. So always keep that in mind, before you agree to do something that you might regret later. Okay? So you look at the special education, then you need to look at related services. That was a third thing. You need to look at related services. Well, what are related services? Well, that's speech language, OT, PT, behavioral services. If your child receives those and requires those things need to be considered as well. And how much were they getting? Because if your IEP team determined that your child requires, let's say, speech language, and they require OT, they require PT, they require behavioral services, then those things are there because they relate to your child's special education services, and they relate to general education, to where that becomes the bridge, the recognized bridge that are required for your child to attain their goals and to make progress like they're supposed to make progress. So I'll say that again. Your speech language services, for example, are absolutely critical in order to bridge that gap between special education and general education, and so that your child can make progress toward their goals. And so you can't sit there and say, well, we're getting direct services or we're handling it this way, but then they're not providing you the speech language, they're not providing the OT, they're not providing the PT, they're not providing the behavioral services. And so many of my clients require appropriate behavioral services in order for them to benefit in the general education setting. So if they're doing virtual only, how the hell are they doing that? How are they accomplishing that so that there's benefit for your child? If your child's supported with an aide, how the hell are they doing that? Or are you serving as your child's aide in a virtual environment? Now, if those of you who want the virtual setting, okay, then you got it. But if you're sitting there saying, well, I'm getting a virtual setting, but it's not a FAPE, it's not what, yes, I understand that. But what I'm saying is I'm speaking to the parents who want their children to receive individual services, that they need direct services. And so there's some of you that are going to say, well, I don't feel comfortable sending my child back to school, or I don't feel comfortable having my child participate in direct one-to-one services right now. And if you've made that decision, fine, guys, you've made that decision. And I will fight for your right to make that decision. And those things are existing right now for many, many, many of you. Now, on the flip side, there's going to be those of you that live in certain states that do not, are not providing that virtual only option. And for you, they should be providing those options for you. And you should be able and have the right to fight for those options and not be forced back into the school right now if you're not comfortable. So that's the caveat I'm going to add. But what I'm seeing the majority of is the opposite, to where a lot of these decisions to not open are not necessarily attached to any kind of governor's order limiting or restricting an opening. It's a board decision, and it's a decision made in tandem with the teachers union, which is happening in a lot of the states where I practice. So in that regard, no, there is an ability for them to provide your child direct services. They're just not. So there you go. If your child cannot benefit from virtual learning in their general education instruction, that's point number one. How much direct or small group instruction is your child getting in their IEP or in their prior IEPs? That's a good assessment and litmus test. And number three, what about their speech language, their PT, their OT, if they qualify and they need those things, but also behavioral services like the involvement of a behavior analyst, ABA therapy, those kind of things, because those are critical services. Critical services. Absolutely, undoubtedly critical services, as much as reading and math for so many of our kids, guys. If you're wanting direct services and they're not giving you those options, and there's no governmental restrictions on them providing that, and I'm talking from the governor, then at that point, you need to assert your child's right, and you need to sit there and say, you are not providing my child with a free and appropriate public education. This is what their education looks like. You're denying that to them, and it is a civil right, guys. It's a civil right. You know, and so you got to stand your ground at some point, and this is it, unfortunately. I wish that there was an alternative, but there's not. I mean, we were all chill and we were all patient in the spring, but this could go on past 9 weeks. This could go on for a semester in many locations. You're talking about potentially 9 months of crap services or no services, at least no service that would benefit your child. So you got to make a decision.